Hello, and welcome to the John Ball Park project plan presented by Vincent, Samantha, Joseph, and Gavin. In this presentation, we're going to cover some of the background of the park to give you context for our solution. We're going to identify the problem. We're going to outline our multifaceted solution, give you a quick breakdown of the costs, and talk about the feasibility and application of what we discovered. So we wanted to give you a quick little bit of background information about our project proposal site. We are considering John Ball Park. It's a park under the City of Grand Rapids control. It's located on the west side of Grand Rapids. It's existed as a park space since the 1890s and is currently approximately 140 acres. It's a mixed-use space with recreational and educational areas. So there's recreation space in picnic areas and hiking trails for people, as well as educational space for the Grand Rapids public school system and the John Ball Zoo, which is the primary feature in the park that people know it for. Because of the contents of the park, it has many different patches, and they are primarily introduced. So while there is some remnant woodland where the hiking trails exist on the southern end of the park, the rest of it is mostly introduced plants, lawn, or structure. And so the disturbed state of the land has improved the human usage of the site. There's more space for recreational activities, and there's a huge educational value to the zoological gardens, but that has really diminished the ability of the site to provide ecosystem services that we also need. So the problem, as we have identified it at the John Ball Park site, is that John Ball Park exhibits low ground porosity, and the effects of stormwater must be mitigated. The stormwater that enters the site through rainfall and from influx from surrounding areas has negative consequences for both abiotic and biotic stakeholders, in that any of the rainwater that falls on the site collects potential surface pollutants, particulate matter, trash, and because the surface is impervious in most of the areas of the park, the large majority of that water ends up in different Grand Rapids stormwater drains, city sewer drains that are on the premises, which ultimately, after treatment, end up in the Grand River. And so we have this situation that any of the water that's getting into the site is largely being put in that system that's already taxed. And so any pollutants that end up in there ultimately have the potential to end up in the Grand River, which is obviously not a desirable outcome. It also degrades the cultural use of the park, and it does that in two ways. One of them is erosion. So the erosion of soils and structure degradation. We see soil deposition. We see soil being removed from areas and deposited in others, which is decreasing the use of the areas where the soil is being deposited. But as a larger issue, we're seeing washouts of critical trails that are for recreational purposes in the park, as well as the upper park pavilion. The base around that on the south-facing side is actually being eroded to the point where the soil is beginning to wash out from underneath the building. So it's threatening that structure due to the speed of the runoff. And it's also a reduction in aesthetic value. As a result of the rainfall, we see a lot of puddles and pooling on the site, which is just unsightly. There's dirt covering places that shouldn't have dirt. And, these potholes in a couple of areas they're just ugly to look at, and it's decreasing the aesthetic value of the site, which is important for this space's use as a recreational area. So because there's a multitude of different aspects to this overarching stormwater management problem that we're approaching at the park, we need to approach it with a couple of different methods of solution. So the first and the kind of simplest from a design and implementation perspective is plant installations. So one of the things that we've learned about in this class and in some other coursework at Grand Valley is the installation of rain gardens. So we're looking at installing 3 of those in different locations in the park. One of them at the bottom of the trails, the steps that run through the center of the park. One around the base of the pavilion that is experiencing that severe erosion, and one at a central location where one of the biggest standing pools of water is in the park after a big rainstorm. The other category that we're looking at are structural changes, and we're looking at 2 key structures that have water mitigation issues: the Zoo School and the Upper Park Pavilion. And we're considering adding green roofs to these structures to help mitigate the rainwater that collects on their roofs and then proceeds down around the bases of the building. In the pavilion case, that's one of their locations of extreme erosion. And for the Zoo School, there is a nearby storm drain where much of that water runoff is sent to. So adding a green roof will help decrease that there. The surface modifications is a third category that we're looking at editing. So in the actual zoological gardens portion of the park, the primary ingress and egress trail is a sloped concrete section that is the lowest part of the zoo area. And so because of this, any of the water that accumulates on the upper areas of the mostly concrete zoo surface collects and then runs down this walkway across the parking lot and towards the pond, which wouldn't be a severe issue except that it is eroding the soil out from between the paved area and the parking lot and the pond, which is causing basically these potholes that people can potentially trip in if you weren't paying attention to where you were going. And it's also washing sediment into the pond, which is obviously not a good thing. So we're going to kind of explore each of these installations in a little bit further detail as we go on.
Our project space is shown here. Our problem solution consists of 3 plant installations, 2 structural changes, and 2 surface modifications as shown by the arrows and by the lines. The plant installations of the rain gardens are implemented along the gradient trail that's shown as that wavy line, and are also shown as the depression rain garden that's shown in the open space, and also the pavilion rain garden that is shown at the top of the squiggly line. The structural changes to be added are the Zoo School green roof and the pavilion green roof. The surface modifications will be the actual pathways of a gravel pathway that is added along the squiggly line and a permeable concrete walkway that is absorbent asphalt that is along the straight line. Rain gardens are planted shallow depressions that use water-tolerant native plants and landscaping to soak up storm water flowing from downspouts or hard impervious surfaces. They absorb water and filter this runoff and allow water to slowly seep into the ground, reducing the amount of water that flows directly to the nearest storm drain, creek, or river. They typically consist of absorbent soil mix, a mulch layer, shrubs, grasses, and flowering plants. Since they use native plants, the best options in West Michigan include woolgrass, columbine, butterfly weed, and bee balm. These are some plants that don't have super invasive roots and are generally low maintenance. Additionally, they also add psychological pleasure to natural environments, and they're typically $10 to $40 per square foot. So on average, they're around $25 per square foot. Green roofs are a series of vegetated layers added to roofing for stormwater retention. There are generally 2 types. There are extensive and intensive green roofs. This project requires semi-intensive green roofs due to their mid-scale and diverse plant types. Generally staying away from succulents and mostly consists of types of grasses. Green roofs can be fitted or retrofitted to many different types of roofs, even slopes. So the cost of a green roof varies based on a number of factors. This could be the access, the size, the depth of the planting material, which would be the soil and the plants being used. Local Grand Rapids areas that provide green roofs are generally $11 a square foot. And the annual maintenance costs vary from 75 cents to $1.50 per square foot. This is due to trimming, keeping up with the plants so they don't spread. And the overall idea is increased roof lifespan, decreased energy consumption, and reducing runoff water from the roofs. Lastly, permeable walkways are a solution to the problem. Permeable walkways offer a source of runoff from the green roofs, and that would be flowing towards the rain gardens. They're a relatively inexpensive option, and there are many different types. The types that we chose that would be the best would be gravel and porous asphalt. Gravel at $1.30 per square foot is less permanent. However, it's a lot easier to implement on gradients, such as the curved walkway that goes through the woods on the gradient towards the pavilion. And the porous asphalt is a little bit cheaper by 30% and is much more permanent and would offer a much better walkway to the John Ball Zoo that would capture a lot of the runoff water that flows from the gradient of a lot of the pavement from the zoo. So altogether, the total costs of those would add up to $18,400 roughly. The total cost can then be computed. There are 3 rain gardens at 5,000 square feet for the depression garden in the open area, 2,000 square feet for the pavilion, and 2,000 square feet for the gradient trail. That adds up to $225,000 altogether. The green roofs would then be they're divided amongst 2 different structures. The total would be 6,000 square feet at $25 per unit of square foot per roof. So that adds up to $150,000. The permeable walkways add up to a total of 1,600 square feet with a grand total of the project cost of $393,400.
So the implementation of this plan is really the next steps of going forward, how what we've discovered through our research at the John Ball site could progress. And there's kind of 2 paths. Both of them are dependent upon both the Grand Rapids community and the City of Grand Rapids municipality, as well as the management for John Ball Park Zoo. So there are a lot of different players. The first sort of path that this could go down is by crowdsourcing through the community to implement some of the more simplistic sides of the project. And we've identified those as being the rain gardens and the green roof for the upper park pavilion. And we've identified these as a community controlled asset because it's something that we could source labor and expertise from the community to help implement, which would reduce the costs and potentially be able to get some action occurring sooner. Then things that would be more dependent upon the municipality and the John Ball Park would be the installation of the permeable walkways and the green roof for the zoo school, because the scopes of these projects, both monetarily as well as from a technical expertise perspective, is much higher. And so for both of those aspects of the projects, sourcing the funding from the Parks and Recreation Department as well as local donors, predicting when the next viable opportunity to install these would be. That would be likely concurrent with a roof change at the zoo and the requirement to repave and re-gravel the walkways. So that would be a current condition assessment. And then, and it's analyzing the value proposition a little more closely from the city's perspective when you're looking at implementing these. That yes, the costs are large, but because of the value you're getting back, both aesthetically and culturally to the people that are using the park, as well as monetarily for the water cycling ecosystem service and the water that's being diverted away from the stormwater system, that ultimately over time these actions have been demonstrated to make fiscal sense for the municipalities. So we believe this grand scope of a project is feasible because of the community commitment and the availability of funding for projects like this. The Grand Rapids Stormwater Master Plan is implementing similar projects around the city of Grand Rapids to help mitigate stormwater. So the funds are available from that program that could potentially be diverted to a solution here at John Ballpark Zoo. Also, WEMIAC is involved in that stormwater master plan, and they are a huge resource for volunteer efforts and labor that could potentially help mitigate some of the costs and make some of the projects that we've proposed at John Ballpark more feasible. Additionally, we actually were surprised to learn in our research that John Ballpark is one of Michigan's top 5 most visited cultural sites, and it really is a source of pride for the west side of Grand Rapids and is a location that a lot of people take advantage of. So taking pride in putting this reinvestment into both the aesthetic and environmental value of this park space would really be valuable for the city of Grand Rapids. So we'd all like to thank you guys for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments below.